Is Israel still an attractive sanctuary for Jews worldwide? Hundreds of thousands have left since it launched its war on Gaza last year. With the violence and hostility only worsening, how is Jewish perception of Israel changing? And is the Zionist model failing? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Sami Zeidan. It's a year since Israel started its military offensive on Gaza. Now it's turning its focus on Lebanon. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu insists he'll achieve his goals of destroying the groups that threaten the security of Israelis. But data suggests hundreds of thousands of them have chosen to leave and search for safety somewhere else. Official Israeli figures show the trend of reverse immigration has grown on a scale not seen in decades. The government is aware of the growing crisis and has introduced incentives to attract new immigrants. But will that work? And what could be the long-term consequences of this exodus from Israel? We'll go to our guests in a moment, but first, this report from Alexandra Myers.
It's described as the biggest security failure in Israel's history. October the 7th, an unprecedented attack by Hamas. Members of Al-Qassam brigades, the armed wing of the group, and other Palestinian resistance fighters infiltrated Israeli territory by air, land, and sea. 1,139 Israelis were killed that day. 251 people, Israelis and foreign nationals, were taken captive. Hamas coined the operation Al-Aqsa Flood, a retaliation against Israeli occupation and aggression. But for Israel, it was one of its darkest days. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu pledged to eliminate the group.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה. לא במבצע, לא בסבבים, במלחמה.
Israel's war on Gaza has since been marked by its indiscriminate killings of civilians and calculated genocide. The violence has sparked disbelief, shock, and outrage around the world, and also within Israel, that's known for its highly militarized society and supposed security. Many Israelis have left the country, nearly 500,000 in the first 2 months of the war alone, and recent surveys found 80% of those living abroad do not plan to return. Immigration to Israel has plummeted, down as much as 70% in the early days of the war. The Jewish diaspora is reporting a growing divide between Israelis living abroad and those staying back home, many of whom support the war. Within Israel, tens of thousands of its citizens spent months protesting against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, angry over his failure to reach a deal to bring back the captives and demanding his resignation. The tensions cut to the heart of the very idea of the State of Israel, founded on the promise of being a safe place for the Jewish people of the world. It depends on increasing its Jewish demographics. The violence and insecurity of the last year has thrown that into question. And as it struggles to rebuild its citizens' trust in its ability to protect them, the government is facing a potentially existential crisis. Alexandra Myers, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Well, let's bring in our guest now. We have from Kfar Achim in southern Israel, Avshalom Elitzur. He's an Israeli quantum mechanics physicist and philosopher. In New York, Eva Borgwardt, the national spokesperson for IfNotNow, a movement of American Jews campaigning to end U.S. support for Israel's apartheid system and demand equality, justice, and a thriving future for all Palestinians and Israelis. And in London, Daniel Levy, president of the US Middle East Project and a former Israeli government advisor. A warm welcome to all of you. If I could start with Avshalom. So when we look at data published in places like the Times of Israel, they refer to a 285% increase in the numbers leaving Israel for good after October the 7th and a decrease in the numbers of Jewish immigrants arriving. Are you seeing, Avshalom, shrinking communities when you look around you?
No, I heard about cases in which people leave, and it is a reason for concern. Academics, physicians, high-tech people, yes, it is a reason for concern. Is it a reason for panic, for despair? No, this is a temporary crisis. We will overcome it. Here is how I see the problem. We have survived for about 70 years. We have been stronger than the Arabs who wanted to destroy us. We have been stronger for the simple reason that we have been more advanced. We have been more civilized. We have been a democracy. Now our democracy is compromised.
Well, I will have to jump in. Forgive me, Avalon. When you look at reports by several international human rights groups, they might take exception, including Israeli human rights groups, they might take exception to words like more civilized democracy. In fact, they say there is a system of apartheid when you have millions of people living without the same rights that Jewish citizens enjoy. Does that help or does that hinder the security of Jewish Israelis?
I thoroughly confess that we are guilty of apartheid. Shame on us. I confess that. However, for the Israelis, for us, and for the Arabs living within us, we have been a democracy. Not the best democracy, but we have been a democracy. This is why we have been stronger. Democracy is now disintegrating due to the worst prime minister we ever had, Netanyahu. That is a temporary crisis. Yes, are people leaving? I heard that. It's not to the degree that should cause us alarm, but we should be concerned. I believe that this is temporary. Democracy will be restored. Israel will can become, and should become, again, a peace-seeking country. I wholeheartedly believe in the two-state solution. Two states or two nations.
All right, let me bring Eva in. How has this last year impacted the way that Jews outside Israel view the country? Has there been a change, Eva?
Yes. I think for a lot of American Jews, watching our government, the U.S. government, use our safety and the safety of Jews in Israel as justification for sending billions of dollars in weapons to the Netanyahu government to enact a genocidal assault on Gaza and drag the entire region toward a broader regional war, sacrificing the hostages in the process, has, I think, forced a lot of people to say, this is not only morally inexcusable and horrifying, it's also putting Jews in further danger. And so the question is, if military domination and unconditional U.S. weapons cannot bring safety, if safety doesn't come from decades of apartheid and occupation, what's the alternative? And that's freedom. Jewish and Palestinian safety are tied together, and that means freedom for Palestinians and equality and justice.
Eva, let me jump in as well and present to you perhaps the opposite opinion in Israel, which is often put as, what else can we do? An attack happened, captives were taken, and the perception amongst, at least that you hear from Israeli officials, is, what else can we do? This is the only course of action. How do you view that as a Jew living outside of Israel?
I think that for a lot of people, what they're witnessing is the collapsing of what they've been taught, which is that this is necessary, that the Israeli army is the most moral army in the world, and this is all necessary for security. And then you juxtapose that with children in Gaza carrying their siblings in rice bags, what's the remains of their siblings, and Israeli soldiers, documenting on TikTok the war crimes they're committing in real time. And so as Netanyahu continues this assault on Gaza while sacrificing the hostages and dragging the entire region into war, endangering Israelis, I think people are saying, what is the alternative? And again, the alternative has to be ending the occupation, apartheid, and siege that has dragged Palestinians and Israelis into this nightmare.
Daniel Levy, is the Zionist ideal, the idea of a state that symbolizes security, stability for Jews, is that being tested? Is it failing?
It's hard to offer a positive answer to that question, and it goes back much further, of course. There is a notion of Zionism that sounds absolutely inoffensive. There is also actual existing Zionism as practiced by the State of Israel for several decades. And it has reached something of a crashing point, perhaps we could call it. And what you see today is the coming to fruition of the inability to accept and acknowledge live Palestinian rights for all those decades. And today, what is written on the tin, which is this is the guarantor of Jewish security, the shelter of last resort, it's probably the most dangerous place in the world for Jews to be today. That broadcasts out onto Jewish safety everywhere in the world, and it won't transition into something that can positively contribute to Jewish life unless it can come to terms with Palestinian life, and that it cannot work in that region of the world on a vision of war and bloodshed and more war and dislocation and displacement. Right. And that's where, if only we could get back to the lives lost since October 6th, but October 6th is not something to strive for. We have to address what was going on previously, and others have spoken to that.
All right, let me bring back Avshalom, because you mentioned a moment ago that you feel, Avshalom, this is perhaps a temporary trend. Do you see the challenges facing Israel in inspiring Jews within the country and worldwide as a temporary challenge, one that can be fixed, or is this more of a systemic long-term challenge now?
I believe it can be amended. I strongly agree with my two partners. We have been oppressing the Palestinians for too long. We have been ripening the seeds, the poisonous seeds of the oppression for too long. Still, none of you, lady, gentlemen, sir, say anything about what could Israel do once the massacre have happened? What could we do? I mean, I'm crying. My heart is breaking. It's a hard day today. My heart is breaking for every Palestinian casualty happening. I see the children. It breaks my heart. Still, had I been prime minister at that morning, what do you think I would do? What would you do, ma'am? What would you do, Daniel? I mean, the problem is now that we are in a war. Remember that at that morning, we saw people cheering, smiling, laughing. First thing we had to do is to wipe out those smiles, smother this laughter, because we would be destroyed if we didn't do that. You have to understand.
Sorry, Avshalom, but surely you're not advocating. You're not advocating, of course, war crimes. I trust. I mean, when you talk about wiping out smiles, when you say what could Israel do?
Netanyahu is the last. Netanyahu
perhaps
is the last
not
person.
Engage in what even the U.S. president has called indiscriminate bombings, right?
Benjamin Netanyahu is the last person I would like to see as a leader of Israel. You know, as a leader of anywhere. That man is a unique phenomenon. Such people come once for centuries. He's a traitor. He's the man who who erected the Hamas. He's the man who prevented the killing of Yahya Sinwar at least 6 times. This is what we hear. We are in deep trouble. I don't deny that. We have enemies, those Sunnah in Gaza, that Shiite who just died in Lebanon, and my country, my motherland, the Iranians who want to destroy us. And we have a very bad government, and we are doing atrocities. We are committing atrocities in Gaza, of which I am deeply shamed. And I'm sorry for that. Is there a solution? Okay. Yes, I strongly believe in that. One of you remembers Yitzhak Rabin. We had his way. His way is still possible. It is still possible to return to the way of peace, of having two states living together, one another. As you said earlier, Eva, our fates are tied. Israelis and Arabs, their fates are tied here for eternity. If it's bad for us, if Israel is not a good place to live for Jews, other states, Arab states, will not be a good place to live for Arabs. So we have to come for a solution.
Okay, I want to bring our other guests back in. I want to give you first, Daniel, an opportunity, since Avshalom kind of laid down the invitation for you and Eva, and what else the question was, very briefly, to address it before we move on, what else could have been done on October the 7th?
Well, I'm sure, because of what we've already heard from Avshalom, that had Netanyahu not been there, one wouldn't have got oneself to that predicament in the first place. And this is why it's so important not to decontextualize. It justifies nothing. It doesn't justify decades of the denial of Palestinian rights, of occupation, of apartheid. It doesn't justify what was done on October 7th. It doesn't justify what's been done ever since. But there is no scenario where people are kept without their rights for decades on end, anywhere in history and geography. This isn't about Israelis and Palestinians exclusively, and all other political avenues are closed to them, and something doesn't burst out, which leaves us with, but there was an option, because let me address this. There were options. The right option is never to commit crimes and target everyone and have your own president, not Netanyahu, but President Herzog from the Labour Party, just a week after October 7th, say, what is this? There is no distinction with civilians. There is no such thing. We're all guilty.
No such innocent civilians.
A in the genocide. So, Sami, Israel had an option, for instance, of saying, we will deal with this. We will open the gates of southern Israel and create a space for Palestinians from Gaza to be, for a period of time, and anyone who stays behind, then we can see how we address this militarily. Of course, Israel didn't do that. And what Israeli government ministers have talked about here, of course, is not a response that's about military. It's a response that has gone after the civilian population.
Understood. Daniel, I'm going to try and shift the discussion back on track so we don't get too far away. And we're bringing Eva back into the discussion and looking at the demographics and the demographic changes which are going on. Is there reason to believe that Israel is not looking so attractive to professionals anymore, that there is a brain drain, that Israel is losing professionals, and that professional Jews outside are not seeing themselves in the environment that exists in the Israeli state right now?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak as much to the emigration of professionals, but what I will say from the perspective of Jews living in the United States is that we are watching our president, Joe Biden, say over and over again, if it weren't for Israel, not a Jew in the world would be safe, while he is sending billions of dollars to the Netanyahu government to escalate regional war, sacrifice the hostages, and continue to carry out massacre after massacre in Gaza and now Lebanon. And I think what we're saying is everyone deserves to be safe no matter where they live. And the current approach is just dragging everyone into further and further danger. Obviously, Palestinians, Lebanese people throughout the region, as well as Israelis and Jews throughout the world.
Okay, dragging people further and further into danger. On that theme, Avshalom, are you concerned with what impact that might have on key sectors of Israeli society, the entrepreneurs, the elite, the people who need a stable environment in order to innovate? And innovation has been very important in Israel's history and its economic history, right? Is there concern? Do you see that this might impact key sectors like the IT industry and so on?
I can understand the impression that you are trying to make, that we are losing our best people. Well, we are losing some. They may return.
These are not impressions I'm making. I'm quoting here that it's been reported all over the Israeli media.
Sure. But let me tell you another thing. Ever since the massacres happened, ever since the wars happened, Israel found within itself resources that we did not believe that we have. The young people, the young generation proved to be so resourceful, so strong, so devoted, so loving. We have new leaderships. We have people, we are seeing so much new powers within ourselves. Let me mention the Israeli Arabs, our brothers, whom we love very deeply. They proved to be extremely loyal, amazingly loyal, ever since this has happened. And remember that for a year and a half, during this hell called Netanyahu regime, we had another government with two young prime ministers. And, it was not a paradise, but it was the beginning of a hope. And it's still there. That leadership is still there. It is the diabolic cloud of Netanyahu, which is still strangling us. But it will not stay for long. The man is facing charges. The man is going to jail for many years for high treason. The man is sick. His wife is psychotic. His son, I don't know what. His own ministers hate him. So please understand that the Netanyahu regime is temporary. Israel is different. Netanyahu is not Israel. And that Israel that Daniel knows, the Israel which looks for peace, which began peace, is still there, waiting. I can promise you that it will not be crushed by the beginning of by the tendencies for dictatorship or for those Ayatollahs and extreme right-wing forces within us. But the hope is still there. So to your question, yes, I'm concerned. I'm concerned to see physicians leaving us, academics leaving us. I don't think that that this is such a worrisome phenomenon, and this is a temporary crisis. We have endured crises like that. I believe that we shall endure this one.
Okay, thank you, Avshalom. Avshalom made an interesting observation there, Daniel, about basically the cloud will lift. Do you agree with that? Do you see that if there is a change of government, if the current prime minister is replaced, will that deal with the sort of long-term challenges which have posed a challenge to Israelis feeling secure? Will it give them the stability? Will it tackle issues like the occupation? We've had a ruling from a finding, I should say, by the International Court of Justice on July the 19th, saying that occupation is illegal. It's gone on for far too long. It's part of what's causing this cycle of instability that everybody is feeling. Will a change in government, a new prime minister, deal with that, end the occupation, end what the international and Israeli human rights groups call apartheid, end this concept of a state that has to be based on a majority of one particular religion or ethnicity? Is all of that going to change, or is that wishful thinking?
Look, I think Avshalom said some things that were very important for me as well, that Netanyahu and this tilt towards this messianic regime is a danger. And the rest of the world is treating this as normal and arming it. So first, let's just establish that. Secondly, I think it's important to acknowledge that with all the difficulties in Israel, with this outmigration, with the brain drain, with the economic difficulties, this is not about to collapse imminently. And I think that corrective is an important corrective. And any such collapse is not going to go smoothly. So we do have to be very cognizant of what better future for Israeli Jews is on offer, as well as a permanent fixture of this region. However, what I'm not seeing is the political alternative. There was a vote in the Israeli parliament just a few weeks ago. Not one Zionist member of Knesset opposed a resolution saying no to a Palestinian state. What Lapid and Bennett, who were referred to, offered when they were in government was the criminalizing and banning of Palestinian NGOs, was higher restrictions on Palestinians and internationals going into the West Bank, was the restarting of extrajudicial killings in the West Bank, was calling everything that criticized, including that report from Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, dismissing it, all this apartheid reports as anti-Semitism. Nothing really, other than increasing security cooperation with the co-opted Palestinian Authority, nothing that you can build this basis of equality on. And that's where the Israeli opposition and the inability to have an alternative narrative in actual existing Zionism is so stuck. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't look for a path that we can walk on together. For me, it's unlikely now to be premised on partition. It absolutely has to be premised on Israeli Jews and Palestinians having their equality, making good on what happened in the Nakba, making good on what has happened in this last year, in these last decades. We need truth and reconciliation, but it can't be premised on a Jewish ethno-national state that does not offer equality to its Palestinian Arab citizens, albeit they are not being treated as people are in the West Bank and Gaza.
Right.
But they do not have equality either. That's not giving us a way forward. And we need that forward.
I think we've got about a minute and a half left. And I want to give Eva a chance to come in, listening to what we're discussing here and what we're saying, and bring it back full circle to what we want to focus on in this show. How does that impact the way that Jews see their future and their connection with the state of Israel? And does that perception, is it tied only to the sort of events that go on in the occupied Palestinian territories and Israel, or is it also tied to some of the demographic changes going on in the US, where you are, and the rising and the changing perceptions of things like the civil rights of African Americans and the racism and the struggle they face, and how that is shaping how Jews face or see the Palestinians?
Yes, I think for me, and I think for a lot of others in my generation, I was born after the Oslo Accords. I've never known a real horizon for a two-state solution. And what I have known is deepening occupation and apartheid. Netanyahu has been prime minister for the majority of my life. But as Daniel said, we also witnessed Herzog say that there are no innocents in Gaza and echo this rhetoric of, human animals and things that Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant and those in charge of the current assault on Gaza were saying that dehumanized Palestinians. And I think that for American Jews who have Palestinian peers in college or, meet Palestinians as their colleagues, their friends, their coworkers, I think it feels extremely clear that there has to be a different answer than endless military domination, massacre and death and occupation and apartheid. And that's why we're advocating for equality and justice in order to have a thriving future for every single person who lives between the river and the sea.
All right. I'm afraid we're out of time, so we're going to have to thank our guests very much for their contributions. Avshalom in Kfar Achim, Eva in New York, and Daniel in London. And thank you too for watching. You can see the show again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, head over to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Sami Zeidan, and the whole team here, for now, it's goodbye.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.